I'm pleased to be standing here today and being joined by a diverse bipartisan coalition of my legislative colleagues, both here in Minnesota and in 15 other states today, as we affirm our state's and nation's commitment to protecting Americans' privacy. The first one is the Student Information Systems Privacy Act. Without going into the detail on this, I like to think of this as the Ferris Bueller bill. When Vice Principal Ed Rooney was calling Ferris Bueller's mom, saying, "Your son has been absent for 9 sick days this semester," and Ferris Bueller had hacked in and counted down the number of days he was absent. Hacked into a school, it's student information systems is what it is. This would prohibit third parties from the ability to access information systems in that way and have access to student information. My daughter, who's a student at St. Paul Central High School, was issued an iPad by the school district. Now, in many districts, those iPads or electronic devices are not necessarily paid for, but in cooperation with third-party agencies and private businesses who mine the data on those devices and use it to sell to other data miners or folks. That information is valuable. We want to make sure our students are protected from that.
My particular interest in these two bills centers around the student privacy issue. And many of you know, as John alluded to, in today's schools, the highly sensitive and personal student information that used to be stored in a file cabinet in the principal's office is now being uploaded onto remote third-party servers called Student Information Services. You'll probably overhear this term SIS, Student Information Services, as these bills move through the process. Despite the sensitivity of this information, which includes students' grades, social security numbers, disability status, the information on whether they've been disciplined, received remedial help, or qualify for free or reduced lunches, all, among other things, limitations on access to and the use of this information by third parties operating student information systems are frequently weak or non-existent. And while these programs are very beneficial, they can also enable third-party device providers and school officials to track and remotely monitor what students do with the device, including remotely activating the device's webcam and reviewing its internet search history. The model bill is designed to retain the benefits of the one-to-one devices while empowering parents and students, free of any coercion, to reasonably restrict who has access to these devices and the sensitive and personal information that may be on it.
I think it's important to know that student data privacy in today's world has really taken on a new meaning because schools are routinely using computer hardware such as iPads to transact student work in the classroom. So students are using these in their day-to-day lives. But the schools themselves are also using these devices to aggregate and track student activity and gather large amounts of personal data. And in many cases, this data is being shared with corporate vendors in ways that are not immediately obvious to parents and certainly not to students. For instance, Apple's iPad consent agreement, and I have a copy here from the St. Paul School District, states that Apple can gather student information. They're required in many instances to submit their actual name and date of birth. That goes to Apple Computer, and then Apple is able to compile a marketing dossier based on the activity of that student. And if you look at the language in here, it does say that they can use student information for marketing and advertising purposes.
Here's examples of things that you wanted to legislate against happening in Minnesota. We had that one example in another state. Do you have some more Minnesota examples?
In greater Minnesota, we litigated against a school district who basically had a staff person whose job it was to monitor the social media behavior of the students of the junior high school. That's not uncommon, by the way. Many schools have counselors or paraprofessionals whose job it is to monitor the social media use of students in their own homes, on their own devices. And in this case, the student was brought in and grilled by a sheriff's deputy and an assistant principal for 4 or 5 hours to give up her passwords to her computer. She gave up her passwords, and then in front of her, they went through and examined everything on her computer and made comments that she found offensive and so forth and so on. It was Glenwood.
The student in Rogers who made a comment on Twitter, which depending on how you look at it, is a public venue and it could go to his Twitter account and see it. But it implicated another teacher, and he went through disciplinary procedures for that. And there were other privacy implications for that student.
This is a preemptive strike. We want to protect people now before they're damaged by personal information getting out into the wrong hands.
Question as to whether it would cause an impact to a local unit of government, for example, a school district, is an open question, because I imagine that one of the reasons why Apple offers the price point that they do to distribute iPads to a school district like the St. Paul School District is because they can mine that data, and it's incredibly valuable. It's a gold mine to be able to use that and establish longitudinal marketing identifiers for these students. You get them young, that's really worthwhile. Their prime spending years for technology are going forward. So I imagine the school district would be contacted by Apple and say, if you don't oppose this, you won't be able to offer iPads, and maybe someone from the school district will come up and testify.
The power in this country is assumed to reside with individuals, with people first, and that and government is supposed to be limited in their powers.